Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. And boy, am I glad I didn't have to go off of the estimates on this week's show because it came down to the wire whether Spider-Man Brand New Day was going to break the all-time domestic opening weekend record. But when the actuals came in, we have real history to talk about on this show. And get ready because I have charts coming out of my ears and soon to be coming out of your ears. So let's jump right into it and start with the weekend top 10 for July 31st to August 2nd. And the number one movie was Spider-Man Brand New Day with a final total. This is a 3-day total of just over $360 million. That is a new all-time domestic 3-day opening weekend record, and we have so many more charts to go into concerning that. In second place was the Odyssey. Sort of the last bastion for people saying the Odyssey was going to fail was that it would collapse against Spider-Man Brand New Day. Well, it did not. It dropped 43.3% and still brought in over $50 million, $51 million. It's close to $400 million domestically. The fact that it had IMAX exclusivity for that third weekend is a big reason why I think it did well. It's going to start splitting IMAX theaters with Spider-Man Brand New Day. It was announced yesterday that Spider-Man is coming to IMAX starting this weekend. But I still think it's got plenty of road ahead of it. So no epic collapse for the Odyssey in the wake of Spider-Man. It actually was a great 1-2 punch that also helped us to break the all-time domestic overall weekend record. We're going to dig way into that. Toy Story 5 came in third place in its seventh week with a $6.7 million total. It's now at $462.1 million domestically. Minions and Monsters came in at just over $6 million, and Moana rounded out the top 5 at $5.6 million. In sixth place was Hades Town the Musical. Now, it dropped about 80.2%. That's not unusual for one of these big events, but it still brought in around $2 million. I believe it's easily the highest grossing pro shot or filmed version of a stage musical at $18.2 million. Filmed meaning filming it on stage. The Invite hanging in pretty well. It's at number 7. It brought in $1.2 million, followed by Evil Dead Burn, which brought in $750,000. I Want Your Sex, which was a hot ticket at Sundance, not so much with its release in 700 theaters. It brought in $634,000. It's about $900 per theater on average, so not a huge crush of business for that film. And in 10th place was Young Washington, which brought in $505,000 and a $46.4 million domestic total. Dropping out of the top 10, we had Obsession. Obsession missed the top 10 when the final numbers came in by about $2,000 out of $500,000 between it and Young Washington. So it almost extended its longest run so far of the year in the top 10 to a 12th week, but it just fell out. It could always jump back in, though. You never know. And Motor City was out of the top 10 after 1 week. And looking at the biggest theater count changes, there were a lot of movies that were dumped to get Spider-Man in as many theaters as possible. Evil Dead Burn lost the most. It lost 1,743 theaters. That's brutal. It went out of wide release. It's now in just 642. Young Washington lost 1,652 theaters. It's still in 623. The Invite lost 1,240 theaters. It's still in 792. And even though it's done well, I think it should have done better. I don't know if A24 put it in the best place to succeed, but I hope that people get a chance to watch it, if not in theaters. Moana lost 1,005 theaters. It's now in just over 3,000. And Motor City lost the bulk of its theaters. It lost 1,000 theaters. It's now in 600. So every week we look at the 2026 box office versus the same weekend in 2025, and I had to completely readjust this chart. Wait till you see the spike on this past weekend. So this is this weekend in 2026 versus the same weekend in 2025, and we were up 264.1% over the same weekend last year. I mean, look at that spike. If you'll remember, the chart was not oriented like this because we only needed to go up to about $300 million. I put it up to $500 million because who knows what's going to happen in December. But yeah, a 264% increase over the same weekend in 2025. And I think that we are going to be looking at probably a big increase for next weekend year over the year because the total for all films last year on the same weekend that we're about to see starting on Friday was about $131.2 million. Spider-Man would need to drop about 63% to not cover that $131 million just on its own. So we're going to see another increase year over year for the first official weekend in August, although I don't think the spike will be nearly as high as we just saw on that chart. But yeah, I mean, that's literally as high as the spike will go because there's never been a weekend that made as much money at the box office as we just saw. So yeah, bit of a massive increase over the similar weekend weekend in 2025. This is what the summer box office picture looks like. Spider-Man Brand New Day, after 3 days, is now the number 3 movie of the summer, about $35 million behind the Odyssey, about $100 million behind Toy Story 5. By next week, it will be the number 1 movie of the summer. I don't even think the Odyssey is going to spend a day at number 1. We'll see. No, it's not. Spider-Man Brand New Day is going to, I think it probably has already passed the Odyssey. But still, it's really strong contenders up there at the top of this chart. Obsession and The Devil Wears Prada rounding out the top 5. And this is a look at my predictions for the summer box office. I picked Toy Story 5 to be the number 1 movie of the summer. Laugh if you want. I made the prediction in late April. I put Spider-Man Brand New Day at number 2. It's going to be easily number 1. Toy Story 5, maybe number 2, maybe number 3. We'll see how the Odyssey does. Scary Movie now officially eliminated from the summer top 10 along with Supergirl. So I'm going to do no better than 8 out of 10 when it comes to my predictions. And about $115 million is where an August release would have to score in order to knock another movie off of my top 10 list. It's not, out of the question. Who knows? End of Oak Street, maybe a movie like that could do well. We've certainly seen August surprises in the past. But at the end of this month, we're going to do a very thorough post-mortem on my predictions for the summer. But yeah, obviously Spider-Man Brand New Day going to be number 1 on that list. So let's jump into some of the records that Spider-Man set this past weekend, and we'll start with the all-time opening weekend record because it fell by about $3 million, and I actually understand why Sony estimated the movie low. Yesterday, or I should say on Sunday, when they put out estimates, they had it coming up just short of the all-time record because as a studio, you don't want to say, hey, we beat the all-time record, and then for some reason the actuals come in and they're lower than you thought, and you have to go, oh, never mind, we're number 2. You want to say that you almost beat it, and then on Monday, you could put out a big release saying like, no, actually we beat it, and that's exactly what they did. Spider-Man Brand New Day, the best opening weekend of all time, about $3 million ahead of Avengers Endgame. Star Wars The Force Awakens back in 2015, now the 5th highest opening weekend of all time. I remember when it made $247.9 million, thinking, oh, that record will never be broken. And now there are 4 movies that have opened ahead of it. The number 6 opening of all time is The Last Jedi, followed by Deadpool and Wolverine, Jurassic World, The Avengers, and Black Panther rounding out the top 10. But inflation does have a part to play if you want to look at things across many different decades. And when you adjust the figures for inflation, well, then Endgame does easily capture the all-time record at $468.6 million inflation adjusted. I use an adjustment figure that is specifically for movie tickets, which is why it may be different from some other figures you see out there. But Brand New Day and Star Wars The Force Awakens pretty much opening to the same figure, even when you adjust for inflation. And that's still crazy. Even if Spider-Man Brand New Day isn't the best opening of all time when you adjust for inflation, dollar for dollar, it was still an event on par with The Force Awakens, which was one of the biggest movie events of all time. So nothing lost, I don't think, as far as how impressive the movie was by the fact that it's not number 1 inflation adjusted. The 4th best opening of all time is Spider-Man No Way Home, adjusted for inflation, followed by Infinity War, 2012's The Avengers, Jurassic World, The Last Jedi, Avengers Age of Ultron, which opened at $277.1 million adjusted, and Black Panther still rounding out the top 10. So, how did Spider-Man Brand New Day beat Avengers Endgame's record? Well, let's look at it day by day, and we'll start with the Thursday preview grosses. Avengers Endgame brought in $60 million in Thursday previews versus Brand New Day, which brought in $72 million in Thursday previews. Now, some people have said that the whole opening weekend record is invalid because Spider-Man Brand New Day had so many more Thursday previews than Endgame. It was basically a whole day of showings. It did break the single day box office record, and I think that there's an argument to be had there that extra amount of preview showings is what contributed to it. But look at the true Friday, meaning if you back out the preview grosses, Spider-Man Brand New Day actually had a true Friday that was a little bit better than Avengers Endgame. The Saturday for Avengers Endgame was about $8 million ahead of Brand New Day, and then the Sunday for Avengers Endgame was about $1.5 million more than what we saw for Brand New Day. But the reason that I don't delegitimize the opening weekend record because Brand New Day had so many more previews than Endgame did is that there's no telling, if those people couldn't go on Thursday, who's to say that they wouldn't have poured in on Friday and Saturday and actually boosted the grosses on that day. So, if you want to talk about inflation adjustment and all that, that's one thing, but I'm not putting the previews down as some sort of an asterisk on Brand New Day's record, because I really do think that with a movie this popular, that business would have just spilled over into a bunch of extra days. And if we're going to talk about X factors, it should be noted that Avengers Endgame had IMAX theaters on its opening weekend. Spider-Man Brand New Day did not have IMAX theaters, which means that the ticket prices were lower substantially for a portion of the audience that would have gone to see it in IMAX. And so if you want to throw in previews, I'll throw back at you, well, Endgame had IMAX, Spider-Man Brand New Day didn't. So that kind of offsets some of these other factors. This was something else I thought was interesting as far as why this movie opened so big and so much more than Spider-Man No Way Home. These were some of the age demographics reported for the opening weekend audience. The blue numbers are for Spider-Man No Way Home. The red numbers are for Spider-Man Brand New Day. And you can see that 68% of the opening weekend audience for Spider-Man No Way Home was 18 to 34 years old. Not a shocker. That is the demographic that generally tends to drive comic book films. And there was a drop for Spider-Man Brand New Day. Only 63% of the audience was 18 to 34. So about a 5% drop. Men under 25 were 38% of the audience for No Way Home. They were 30% of the audience for Brand New Day. Women under 25 were basically stayed flat. 22% for No Way Home, 21% for Brand New Day. And then men over 35, 15% of the audience for No Way Home, 21% of the audience for Spider-Man Brand New Day. So we saw an audience that got just a little bit older from the last Spider-Man film, and I think that's because this movie is hitting kind of a sweet spot with Spider-Man fans. Obviously, Tom Holland, Zendaya, everybody else, Spider-Man the character, is bringing in that younger audience as they always have, but I think there's also a substantial part of the audience that has been around for the 9 years now that Tom Holland has played Spider-Man that are sticking around and also going out on opening weekend. Because keep in mind, Tom Holland's played Spider-Man for 9 years. Tobey Maguire played Spider-Man for 5 years. Andrew Garfield's movies only spanned, I think, 2 years. And so he's really lived with this character in live action longer than anybody that we've ever seen. And looking at these age demographics, to me, it says they're bringing in the young audience, but they're also bringing in some older moviegoers that maybe wouldn't go on opening weekend because they are attached to this character and they've been around. Maybe they were 20 years old when the movie started getting made. Now they're 29. Maybe they were 25 and now they're 34. That, I think, is another reason why this movie was able to capture the audience so well, is because you're kind of speaking to two different audiences. And the movie's huge opening didn't just catch a lot of analysts by surprise, it also caught the members here on the channel by surprise, because last week I asked, will Spider-Man Brand New Day have a bigger domestic opening, not than Avengers Endgame, but than Spider-Man No Way Home? And only 36% of the audience said yes, it would. 64% of the audience said no, it wouldn't even open bigger than No Way Home. I froze this poll, by the way, on Thursday when preview numbers started coming in. So a lot of people, including me, expecting this movie to be a huge success, but not this massive. And this is one of the very few times on the channel where I've run a member poll where the answer has been somewhat far off from what actually happened. So after 3 days in theaters, how is Spider-Man Brand New Day looking as far as theatrical profitability? Well, here's my little formula. You can see it made $121 million from China. You don't see that kind of gross coming out of China much anymore. $451 million internationally and $360 million after 3 days at the domestic box office. The movie had a reported budget of $225 million. I'm putting up another $150 million for marketing and advertising costs for a total cost for the movie of $375 million. My estimate is that $420 million has already come back to the studio. And so I'm projecting after 3 days that not only has Spider-Man Brand New Day made its budget back in the theatrical window, it is already showing a theatrical profit of $45.6 million, which means that every dollar that comes back to the studio from now on just goes on top of that. So this is going to be a massive moneymaker for Sony. And apart from that, if you want to look at ancillaries, it's also going to be a massive moneymaker for Disney. They've got merchandising. It keeps the image of Spider-Man alive, the brand of Spider-Man alive, if they want to include him in further MCU movies. This is nothing but an absolute grand slam, out of the park home run for Tom Holland, for Spider-Man, for Sony, for Marvel, for Disney, for everybody. And it's a great story to watch. We haven't even scratched the surface on the charts for today, but before we move on, I want to thank the sponsor for today's show, Factor. As you know from watching the channel, my routine or lack thereof is crazy. Travel, late nights editing, you name it. So it's good to have fresh, easy meal options on hand for whenever it's time to eat. And that's why I am a fan of Factor. Factor sends chef-crafted, ready-to-eat meals designed by dietitians right to my door. So if I need to eat fast or late, well, fast food's not my only option. Factor's weekly menu features over 100 nutrient-dense meals to choose from, including new options like salmon burgers and shredded pork. And you can also add on things like pumpkin-flavored cheesecakes and protein shakes if you're balancing dessert time and gym time. Factor meals are also ready in just 2 minutes with no prep and no cleanup, so no matter what your schedule has in store, you'll have time for Factor. If the Odyssey puts you in the mood for some Greek flavors, next week's menu includes Athenian-style feta chicken, which is just one of so many options with flavors from around the world that are available every week. Let's eat real. Head to factormeals.com/Murrell 50 off and use code Murrell 50 off to get 50% off and one free breakfast item per box for 1 year while supplies last until 10/31/2026. That's code Murrell 50 off at factormeals.com. Murrell 50 off at factormeals.com. See their website for more details. All right, let's take a look at this week's Charts with Dan trivia question, and it concerns the changeover as far as what movies have had the biggest opening weekend of all time. Since 1975, 9 franchises have set the all-time domestic opening weekend record, then broken that record and set another one with one or more later films in the franchise. And what I want to know is, can you name those 9 franchises? Some of them are easy. Spider-Man is one of them. But can you name the other ones? I think some of them might be easier to guess, and some of them I didn't even think about. So I'll give you a second to think. Pause if you need to. But here are the 9 franchises that have set the record and then broken it with a later film. Jaws, Star Wars, Star Trek, Indiana Jones, Batman, the Jurassic Park/World Series, Harry Potter, Spider-Man, and the Avengers. And I thought it might actually be interesting, because you don't break the all-time record very often, to look at the history of what movies have actually set the opening weekend record at the box office since 1975. Jaws set it originally back in 1975. Jaws 2 broke it in 1978, but later that year, a re-release of Star Wars broke the all-time opening weekend record. Then later in 1978, Every Which Way But Loose broke the Star Wars record. The next year, 1979, Star Trek The Motion Picture had the biggest opening weekend of all time. That was beaten 2 years later by Superman 2. A year later, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. As big a fan as I am of that movie, I never knew it had at one time the biggest opening weekend of all time. It set the record. However, the next year, Return of the Jedi broke that record. The year after that, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom broke the record. 3 years later, Beverly Hills Cop 2 set the all-time opening weekend record. Then in 1989, this is really interesting, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade broke the box office record. 3 weeks later, Ghostbusters 2 broke that record. And a week later, Batman broke Ghostbusters 2's opening weekend record. So the record was broken 3 times in about 5 weeks. In 1992, Batman Returns beat Batman 89's record. The next year, Jurassic Park took over the record. 2 years later, Batman took it back with Batman Forever. In 1997, Jurassic Park took it back with The Lost World. 4 years after that, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone set the record. And then the next summer, the original Tobey Maguire Spider-Man became the first movie to ever put up a $100+ million opening weekend at the box office and took the all-time record. 4 years after that, Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest took the record. Then Spider-Man took it back in 2007 with Spider-Man 3. Then, of course, we had The Dark Knight in 2008. Harry Potter took the record again with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. The Avengers took it the next year in 2012. 3 years later, Jurassic World took the record. Later that year, Star Wars The Force Awakens took that record. Then Avengers Infinity War took the record 3 years later in 2018. The next summer, Avengers Endgame set the record. And here we are now, 7 years later, which is the biggest gap between record-breaking movies since they started keeping track of this in 1975, with Spider-Man Brand New Day beating Avengers Endgame's record. And I mentioned earlier that Spider-Man Brand New Day did also set the opening day record for a movie at $169.8 million. That's about $12 million more than Avengers Endgame, which maybe not coincidentally is about how much more it did in preview grosses, which is why I said I think you can definitely have the conversation that the enhanced previews helped it to break the opening day gross record. Avengers Endgame now number 2, followed by No Way Home, The Force Awakens, and Avengers Infinity War, rounding out the top 5. And Spider-Man Brand New Day also set the single-day gross record all time for its opening Friday, ahead of the opening Fridays of Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home, and Star Wars The Force Awakens. Then we had Avengers Endgame's opening Saturday, followed by the opening Friday of Avengers Infinity War, the opening Friday of Star Wars The Last Jedi, then Spider-Man Brand New Day's opening Saturday, followed by the opening Friday of Deadpool and Wolverine, and the opening Friday of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. It probably goes without saying, but Spider-Man Brand New Day had the biggest domestic opening weekend of the year, too, in addition to all time, coming in only about $200 million ahead of Toy Story 5, which is now the second best domestic opening weekend of the year. So yeah, I'd say it cleared that hurdle by just a little bit. And it had the best opening weekend in the history of the MCU, ahead of Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home, Avengers Infinity War, and Deadpool and Wolverine. That's your top 5. The Avengers, Black Panther, Age of Ultron, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and Black Panther Wakanda Forever round out the top 10. And if you look at the MCU openings by inflation-adjusted numbers, well, Avengers Endgame gets the number 1 spot, followed by Spider-Man Brand New Day. Infinity War comes in 3rd. No Way Home comes in 4th. The Avengers in 2012 comes in 5th with an adjusted total of $316.2 million, followed by Age of Ultron, Black Panther, Iron Man 3 at $262.7 million, Captain America Civil War, which of course introduced us to Spider-Man, at $250.5 million, and rounding out the top 10 is Deadpool and Wolverine at $228.4 million. And Spider-Man Brand New Day had the best opening in the history of the Spider-Verse, ahead of No Way Home, Spider-Man 3, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and Spider-Man Homecoming. And here's the interesting thing about the Spider-Man franchise. If you look there at number 7, Spider-Man Far From Home is down there at $92.5 million. That movie opened on a Tuesday, which means by the time it got to its opening Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it had already been open for 3 days. If the release structure on that film had been different, then I think that Tom Holland's Spider-Man films would be one of those what I call stair-step franchises, where each installment opens higher than the one before. But that number, the opening weekend number, is low on Far From Home because it opened so much earlier. So even some of the box office storytelling about this particular iteration of the franchise, I think bears looking into because of that kind of quirk in the release schedule. And again, it also just goes to show that audience enthusiasm is growing with time, which is sort of the opposite that we've seen, even with Spider-Man movies that people have loved. Sometimes the enthusiasm wanes over time. Adjusted for inflation, Brand New Day still has the best opening in the history of the Spider-Verse, followed by No Way Home. Then we have Spider-Man 3 with an adjusted opening weekend of $250 million. The original Spider-Man at $229.2 million. And then Spider-Man 2 at $162.1 million, although it should be noted that film opened on a Wednesday, so it had 2 days of box office before that opening weekend kicked in. Followed by Spider-Man Homecoming, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 at $135.7 million. Across the Spider-Verse at number 8, Spider-Man Far From Home at number 9, and Venom rounding out the top 10. And that brings us to our member poll question for today. What is your favorite Spider-Verse movie? And this includes live action, includes animated, it includes the Sony spinoffs if you want to vote for Morbius, but it does not include films in which Spider-Man appears that aren't Spider-Man movies. So for example, Avengers Infinity War or Captain America Civil War would not qualify for this poll because it's not a Spider-Man movie. It's just a movie that Spider-Man's in. So of all these spider-centric movies that are out there or Spider-Man universe-related movies, which one is your favorite? Leave your answer in the comment section of the member poll, which is live now. If your answer is already there, upvote it instead of answering twice because that helps me to tabulate the results, and I'll share those results on next week's show. So as I mentioned up top, not only was Spider-Man Brand New Day the top opening movie of all time, it also headlined the top grossing weekend of all time at the domestic box office. So taking the combined box office of all releases, this past weekend made more than any box office weekend in the past. And to figure out why, I want to take a look at the 10 highest grossing box office weekends of all time. Starting with number 10, which was December 15th to the 17th, 2017. That was the weekend that Star Wars The Last Jedi opened. And as you can see, it was doing the heavy lifting there. $220 million of a $278 million total. Ferdinand was there at number 2. It made $13 million, but it was The Last Jedi show. The number 9 highest grossing domestic box office weekend was the week that Spider-Man No Way Home opened with a huge number, but you can see it didn't really have much support behind it. Encanto at $6.4 million and West Side Story at $3.6 million. This is when the box office was still in recovery mode at the end of 2021. So it was really a one-man band with Spider-Man No Way Home. At number 8 was the week that Deadpool Deadpool and Wolverine opened at $211.4 million. It had good support from Twisters and Despicable Me 4. Twisters brought in $34.9 million. So you can see why the overall gross was around $284.8 million. The seventh highest grossing weekend of all time was the weekend that Black Panther opened. But again, a $286 million total. Black Panther did 202 of that 286. Peter Rabbit was there at 17.5. 50 Shades Freed at 17.3. But Black Panther really providing the bulk of the lift there. The sixth highest grossing domestic box office weekend was the second week of Star Wars The Force Awakens. It made $149.2 million. Then it had Daddy's Home behind it at 38.7 and Joy at 17. So a good second week gross boosted by some new releases. The fifth highest grossing domestic box office weekend of all time was Barbenheimer weekend, where Barbie opened to $162 million and Oppenheimer opened to $82.4 million. The third place film was Sound of Freedom at $19.8 million. The fourth highest grossing domestic box office weekend was the opening weekend of Star Wars The Force Awakens. Again, it did the bulk of the work here. It brought in $247.9 million. The second place movie was Alvin and the Chipmunks The Road Trip, which brought in $14.2 million, followed by Sisters with $13.9 million. The third highest grossing box office weekend was the opening weekend of Infinity War. And again, it did the heavy lifting, $257.6 million. The second place film was A Quiet Place at $11 million. Then we had now the second highest grossing domestic box office weekend ever with Avengers Endgame at $357.1 million. The second place movie was Captain Marvel at $8.3 million. The total gross for the weekend was $402 million. And then we have this past weekend at $436.5 million. And this is why I think it is so comfortably ahead of the total weekend box office for Avengers Endgame. You had the huge opener in Spider-Man Brand New Day, but you also had a great support act, stronger than any of the ones we've seen in any of the other charts, with the Odyssey in second place, bringing in $51 million. So that's what boosted the overall theatrical marketplace. If the preview grosses are the reason that Spider-Man Brand New Day broke the single day record, the Odyssey doing so well is the reason that this weekend broke the highest grossing box office weekend record. It's because there was another movie in the marketplace that people were motivated to go see and that they did go see. And let's talk a little bit about the Odyssey. It's been all Spider-Man so far, and there's a few things I wanted to note. First of all, because I did the show early last week, I was on the road to see Spider-Man to review it, then I missed what turned out to be a box office record, because when actual numbers came in, the Odyssey did end up having the best hold in its second weekend ever for a $100+ million opener. It only dropped 27.1%. That put it ahead of Wicked and Top Gun Maverick. It was trailing both of those movies when estimates came in. So the Odyssey itself also broke a record last weekend that I'm happy to correct now that we have actual numbers. And the Odyssey is now Christopher Nolan's third highest grossing film ever domestically. It has passed the gross of Oppenheimer. Remember how excited we all were, or at least I was, about how Oppenheimer was performing. The Odyssey passed it in about 2 weeks. It's now headed towards Dark Knight Rises territory. We'll see if it can get up to the Dark Knight territory to become the highest grossing film in Christopher Nolan's filmography. It is the highest grossing film in Matt Damon's filmography, now ahead of Oppenheimer, The Martian, The Bourne Ultimatum, and Saving Private Ryan, so a career high, unadjusted for inflation for Matt Damon. And it's now the second highest grossing R-rated film of all time. It's past Deadpool, Passion of the Christ, American Sniper, Oppenheimer, Joker. I don't know if it's going to get up to where Deadpool and Wolverine is, $636.7 million. That's a pretty tall order. We'll see, but it's definitely going to add to its current domestic total and really cement its place at that number 2 spot. And let's talk about profitability for the Odyssey. If you missed it last week, I did a video kind of doing a fact check, if you will, on some of the conspiracy theories about the movie. I don't know what else you'd want to call them. But one thing I didn't touch on was the profitability of the film. So let's see. Some people claiming it needed to make $1.2, $1.3, $1.4 billion to break even. Where does the Odyssey stand right now? First of all, the share from China is TBD because it hasn't even opened in China yet, although China reportedly is planning a massive IMAX release for the film. So there's a big chunk of box office we have yet to see for the Odyssey. But it's brought in $516.8 million internationally. I report 206 of that coming back to the studio. $119 million coming back from the first week in theaters, $79.8 million coming back from week 2, and $25.5 million coming back from week 3. It's budgeted at $250 million. Advertising was reported at $125 million. So it's a project that cost the studio $375 million. It has a $912.3 million worldwide gross right now. I estimate that the net for that is $431.3 million. So it has covered the production budget, and it has also covered the advertising costs, but there is a 20% cut reportedly that goes to Christopher Nolan and or to Emma Thomas. I've read this a report that said 15 goes to Nolan, 5% goes to Emma Thomas, but still reportedly 20% of the first dollar gross, meaning the net profits before it gets distributed to the studio goes to Christopher Nolan. So I'm even taking that out. So if you don't deduct Nolan's cut, the movie is already profitable in the theatrical window. Even when you deduct 20% off the first dollar gross, the Odyssey is currently only about $29.9 million away from breaking even in the theatrical window. So this assertion that the Odyssey is not going to break even either because it needs to make $1.3 billion or because Nolan's getting 20% is false. It is going to break even in the theatrical window sometime this week, and the break-even point is going to be somewhere around $1 billion. So the Odyssey did not collapse in the face of Spider-Man Brand New Day, and it is going to be profitable in the theatrical window. So you can put those two theories to bed. And let's take a turn now from the domestic box office to all other markets outside the US and Canada. These were the top 5 films of the weekend internationally. And of course, Spider-Man Brand New Day led the way with $572 million from all international markets. That is an incredibly impressive number. The Odyssey, though, much like we saw domestically, had a soft drop. It dropped 33.6% internationally. That's actually a better hold than we saw domestically, and brought in another $85.2 million. All Wishes Come True also had a soft drop. It brought in $30.1 million for a 31.1% weekend over weekend drop. Toy Story 5 brought in another $14.5 million, and Kung Fu Soccer brought in $13.3 million. When you take those international numbers and you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get our top 10 films worldwide. And of course, number 1 was Spider-Man Brand New Day. When all box office results were tallied up, it made nearly $1 billion, $932 million in its opening weekend. That's the second best, as we'll see in a minute, opening ever for a movie worldwide. The Odyssey brought in another $136.2 million worldwide, with a 36.7% drop from the previous weekend. It and Spider-Man Brand New Day will very shortly cross the $1 billion mark. All Wishes Come True comes in third place. Toy Story 5 brought in $21.2 million worldwide. Minions and Monsters comes in fifth place at $17.6 million worldwide. Then we have Moana at number 6 at $16.2 million. Kung Fu Soccer at number 7 at $13.3 million. At number 8, we have Chikawa the Movie, The Secret of the Mermaid Island, which brought in $8.6 million and has sold a total of $30 million so far. This is a film version of the anime show based on the internet manga series. It was one of the best openings in Japan's box office history. So they have their own cultural phenomenon happening over in Japan, or at least they did this past weekend. At number 9 is Make Zhonghe Great Again, which is a Chinese workplace comedy. It brought in $8.35 million. And Obsession, still in the worldwide top 10, with $7.9 million. It's trying to get to that $500 million global mark. It dropped just 27.5% over the previous weekend. And these are the top worldwide opening weekends for 2026. Spider-Man Brand New Day was able to take number 1 by just over $600 million. So it just kind of squeaked by the Super Mario Galaxy movie, which had the previous best opening of the year at $314.1 million. It makes it look so small, but Super Mario had such a great opening. It's just that Spider-Man had a absolutely massive opening. Toy Story 5, The Odyssey, and The Devil Wears Prada 2 round out the top 5 best opening weekends for the year so far. And Spider-Man Brand New Day had the second best worldwide opening of all time, behind only Avengers Endgame, which opened to $1.2 billion in its opening weekend. Spider-Man Brand New Day is just going to have to settle for $932 million, but it still came in ahead of Avengers Infinity War by about $300 million, so it's number 2 with a bullet. Spider-Man No Way Home, the 4th best worldwide opening of all time, followed by Zootopia 2, The Fate of the Furious, The Force Awakens, Jurassic World, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, and Captain Marvel, rounding out the top 10. The Odyssey is now the fourth highest grossing R-rated film of all time worldwide. It's moved past both Deadpool movies as well as Demon Slayer Infinity Castle, and it is closing in on Oppenheimer. It should be there and probably into the $1 billion club by next week's show, and then we'll see how far it gets ahead of Joker and how close it gets to Deadpool and Wolverine. So the Odyssey poised to be just the third R-rated film ever to crack $1 billion at the worldwide box office. And it is Christopher Nolan's fourth highest grossing film of all time worldwide. Once it moves past Oppenheimer and breaks $1 billion, it's not going to take much for it to move beyond The Dark Knight, and then not much more to pass The Dark Knight Rises to become Christopher Nolan's highest grossing film ever around the world. All right, let's return to the domestic box office now and take a look at what I call some of our specialty charts. And we'll start with the top per theater average for this past weekend. No surprise here, Spider-Man Brand New Day leads the way, bringing in an average of $80,252 per theater in each of its 4,487 theaters. That is a phenomenal number. In second place was The Samurai and the Prisoner, which played in 3 theaters and brought in $21,491. This is a Japanese film adaptation of the novel Kokorojo, and it was directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. In third place was the documentary Wild Inside, which played in just 1 theater and brought in $19,491. It's a documentary about an owl who made its escape from the Central Park Zoo in 2023, so I can take a good guess where that 1 theater was, where it was located here in the U.S. The Odyssey had the 4th best per theater average at $13,221 in each of its 3,861 theaters. So for theaters that had both the Odyssey and Spider-Man Brand New Day, they brought in, on average, about $93,000 in 3 days. I'll take it. And finally, in 5th place was the 4K restoration of Manhunter, which brought in $3,843 per theater in just 5 theaters. That is, of course, Michael Mann's adaptation of Red Dragon, the first movie to feature Hannibal Lecter before The Silence of the Lambs would do it a few years later. And looking at the top per theater averages for the year, Charlie XCX's film The Moment still has the number 1 spot when it opened to over $100,000 per theater in 4 theaters back in January. But Spider-Man Brand New Day had the 2nd best per theater average of 2026 so far, coming in ahead of Pillion, Maddie's Secret, and The Invite, all of those films opening in very limited release. And speaking of limited release, let's look at the top films in limited release this past weekend, which I define as fewer than 1,000 theaters. I Want Your Sex played in 705 theaters and brought in $634,000. Again, it just goes to show you the dissonance between something like a film festival and when a movie actually gets released, because the tickets were so hard to get for this at Sundance, I didn't even get a chance to see it, and now most people didn't choose to see it, even when it was in a pretty good release. I mean, 705 theaters, that's nothing to sneeze at. Mary Oliver, Saved by the Beauty of the World, which is a documentary we've mentioned on the show before, was in its 5th week of release and brought in $70,000 in 48 theaters. The Samurai and the Prisoner brought in $64,000 in 3 theaters. Her Private Hell, which is the latest film from Nicholas Winding Refn, really had a poor performance. It didn't have a great opening, but it dropped about, I think, 85 or 90% in its 2nd weekend to just bring in $55,000 in 150 theaters. So really kind of come and gone when it comes to its theatrical run. And Sheep in the Box comes in 5th place at just over $53,000 in 38 theaters. This is what the 2025 domestic box office looks like. For now, Toy Story 5 is the number 1 movie, but by next week, it's going to be Spider-Man Brand New Day. Super Mario Galaxy currently number 2. The Odyssey moves up to become the 3rd highest grossing film of the year. It's moved past Michael, which is down to number 4. Spider-Man Brand New Day there at number 5. Project Hail Mary down 2 spots to number 6. Obsessions down 1 to number 7. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is down 1 spot to number 8. Backrooms is down to number 9. The Mandalorian and Grogu is down to number 10. And Hoppers is out of the 2026 domestic top 10. These are the top 10 movies worldwide for the year so far. At number 1 is Toy Story 5 with $1,067 million. The Super Mario Galaxy movie moves up 1 spot to number 2. They're doing some adjusting of grosses, so it and Michael could switch places again. Sometimes they just do like a final dump of numbers, so I'm trying to figure out what the actual gross is there. Spider-Man Brand New Day enters the chart at number 4 after 3 days of release. It's the 4th highest grossing film worldwide of 2026. The Odyssey's up 2 spots to number 5. And again, all 5 of these movies are going to be billion-dollar grossers. It'll be the first time since 2019 that there will be 5 or more billion-dollar grossing films in 1 year. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is down 2 spots to number 6. Project Hail Mary is down to number 7. Pegasus 3 down to number 8. Obsession is down 1 spot to number 9. Minions and Monsters is down to number 10. And Backrooms is out of the worldwide box office top 10. And now let's get to a somewhat new segment on the show as I look at the top earning stars of the year domestically. So these are the stars whose combined box office totals from all of their movies are the highest. And as you might imagine with Spider-Man Brand New Day opening, we have some big changes. One change that did not happen, though, is at the top spot. For one more week, Benny Safdie, due to his roles in the Super Mario Galaxy movie and the Odyssey, is the highest earning star of the year, or I should say, I guess maybe actor of the year, at $825.3 million in combined domestic box office. But then we have 3 new names. Zendaya, now the second highest grossing actor of the year at over $800 million domestically. She's in the Odyssey and Spider-Man Brand New Day. And what puts her over the top and at the number 2 spot is that she also had the drama earlier this year. Robert Pattinson, her co-star, is not yet in the top 10, but I think he will be by next week. Then we have Tom Holland and Jon Bernthal at number 3 and number 4. They're tied because their 2 credits are Spider-Man Brand New Day and The Odyssey. Melissa Villaseñor is down 3 spots from last week due to her roles in Hoppers and Toy Story 5. Anne Hathaway also down 3 spots. She was in The Devil Wears Prada 2, The Odyssey, and Mother Mary. She's brought in $618.6 million, and she has an August release, The End of Oak Street, so she's going to be moving up this chart. Coleman Domingo's down 3 spots. Dion Cole's down 3 spots. The cast of Toy Story 5 is down 2 spots, and Chris Pratt is down 4 spots with his $454.2 million combined gross from the Super Mario Galaxy movie and Mercy. And this should be an interesting one to track. Maybe a supporting role could be the difference between somebody being on this list and not being on this list. So we are into a new month. We're into August, which means that July is over, and it's time to catch up on how our cumulative box office is looking, as well as the market share for each studio this week. Let's look first at the cumulative box office through July 31st. So this chart only includes the opening day of Spider-Man Brand New Day, but the 2026 box office is still up almost $600 million from where we were at the end of July in 2025. That's up from an increase of $538.2 million, which is where we were at the end of June. And you can see that we're currently at $5.81 billion to 2025's $5.21 billion and 2024's $4.74 billion. So even though we had Barbenheimer in July 2023, we're still tracking ahead of 2023 at the overall box office. And keep in mind, it was fall of 2023 when things started getting pushed due to the writers and actor strikes. So we should have an advantage in the fall and then going into the holiday season. So I think that we are easily staring down the barrel at the best box office year since the pandemic. But the question is, how close can we get to where we were in 2019 and before? Still, I think we're in really good shape, and we'll see with Spider-Man Brand New Day and with the Odyssey continuing to play into August if we can rack up those numbers even higher compared to where we were last year. This is the theatrical market share for 2026. This is all tickets sold since January 1st, and this chart does include Spider-Man's Saturday and Sunday. The leader now among all studios is Universal. It takes over the number 1 spot, up 5.3% from the end of June, with 24.7% of all tickets sold since January 1st. Disney is in a close second place at 24.2% of all tickets sold. So Universal and Disney basically combining for almost 50% of all tickets sold so far this year. Amazon is in third place for now, but it's basically tied with Sony. Sony picked up, I think, about 5% market share. So it is going to have a big jump on this chart when we look at it at the end of August. It currently has the same market share as Amazon, both with 9.1%. Then we have the indie studios at 8.4%, your Neons, etc. Lionsgate has an 8.1% market share. A24 has a 6% market share. And the 2 studios that are looking to merge, Paramount and Warner Brothers, have by far the lowest market share of any major studio. Paramount with 5.4%, Warner Brothers with just 5% market share of all tickets sold. So combined, they're at what, 10.4%? That would barely put them in third place amongst all studios. Someone explain to me how the economics of that deal works, because it ain't looking great. So those are all the charts I have for the box office. Let's quickly take a look at the world of streaming. And we will start with the latest numbers from Netflix. New ones will be out later today. This covers the week of July 20th through the 26th. And the most watched program on Netflix is the Kevin Hart comedy, 72 hours at 22.11 million views. In second place is the Netflix true crime documentary, A Toxic Love Story, at 18 million views. In third place is Elise, Shadows of a Woman, a Brazilian crime thriller based on a true story. It brought in 16.19 million views. Then we have Desire, the Netflix original movie, at number 4. At number 5 is Elite Force 1, which brought in just over 10 million views. This is a French series about a squad of super cops. Then we have The East Palace remaining in the top 10 at 8.14 million views. The Netflix original movie, The Debt Collectors, at number 7 with 7.57 million views. It is a film from Thailand about a former debt collector seeking revenge on a group of loan sharks. That just sounds like a Jason Statham movie to me. Agent Kim Reactivated is at number 8. I Will Find You is at number 9. And the Will Ferrell comedy series, The Hawk, stays at number 10 with 6.21 million views. And these are the most watched programs on Netflix in 2026 based on the first full 6 months of ratings data we have, plus what we've gotten week to week since then. War Machine, the most watched program at 150 million views. K-Pop Demon Hunters moves back up to second because it just doesn't fall off the charts. So we see how it does every single week at 137.4 million views. Swapped is at number 3. The Rip moves down to number 4, followed by Apex and His and Hers. I Will Find You has broken the 100 million view barrier at number 7. That bumps Bridgerton season 4 down to number 8. Thrash down to number 9. And Voicemails for Isabel breaks into the top 10 at 80.69 million views. Let's look now at the latest ratings from Nielsen. Now, these are not global numbers like we just saw with Netflix. They're domestic only, and they're delayed by about a month because that's just how Nielsen likes to do it. So this covers the week of June 29th to July 5th, which of course encompasses July 4th. And the most watched movie that week in the US, according to Nielsen, was Project Hail Mary at 14.3 million hours watched. The Sheep Detectives comes in second place, so Amazon taking number 1 and number 2 on this chart at 9.4 million hours watched. Then we had the debut of Enola Holmes 3 on Netflix. Kind of a soft debut, both globally when we saw Netflix's numbers and domestically now that we have these numbers at 8.41 million hours watched. The Netflix comedy Little Brothers in fourth place. Avatar Fire and Ash is in fifth place. Independence Day, which usually hits the chart on July 4th week, comes in at sixth place at 5.5 million hours watched on Hulu. Voicemails for Isabel is at number 7. Spider-Man Homecoming hitting the chart. I guess people were already gearing up for Spider-Man Brand New Day at 4.76 million hours watched. Hoppers is at number 9. And Toy Story 3 is the designated Toy Story movie this week to be on the top 10 at 3.2 million hours watched. These were the most watched streaming shows for June 29th to July 5th. At number 1 was Love Island USA, a hugely popular summer watching choice for a lot of people around the country at 32.4 million hours watched. I Will Find You comes in second place. Then we have Avatar The Last Airbender on Netflix at 18.3 million hours watched. The new Netflix series, I guess you call it a spinoff, Worst Neighbor Ever, comes in fourth place at 17.1 million hours watched, followed by The Last Ship at number 5. It's seeing a resurgence on Netflix this summer. Bluey's at number 6. House of the Dragons at number 7. Dutton Ranch is at number 8. Grey's Anatomy is at number 9, and The Big Bang Theory is at number 10. And Worst Neighbor Ever had the 5th best debut for a new streaming series here in the US this year. Coming in behind Reality Check, Inside America's Next Top Model, The Burrows, His and Hers, and I Will Find You. So all 5 of those shows on Netflix. And these are the numbers for the top shows as far as watch time per available episode. So you take the number of episodes and how many hours each episode was watched. You divide those numbers, and that's how you get this number. Worst Neighbor Ever comes out on top here with an average watch time of 4.28 million hours per episode, followed by I Will Find You at 2.29 million hours per episode, and Dutton Ranch at 1.53 million hours per episode. Avatar The Last Airbender, also over a million hours watched per episode at 1.22 million. And then the Legally Blonde prequel series Elle on Amazon Prime Video comes in at number 5 at just over 1 million hours of watch time per episode. House of the Dragon is at number 6 at 723,000 hours per episode, followed by Ms. Rachel, The Polygamist, Sullivan's Crossing, and The Last Ship. And looking at the top performances measured by watch time per episode, Worst Neighbor Ever also has the 5th best performance this year at 4.28 million hours per episode. That comes in behind I Will Find You back on June 22nd, the week of June 22nd at 5.18 million hours per episode. Then we have Reality Check Inside America's Next Top Model, Dutton Ranch, and His and Hers with the best watch time per episode performance of the year at 6.23 million hours per episode. And those are all the numbers I have for you this week, which is good because my throat is feeling kind of raw. I've been yelling a lot of numbers at you today. Before we go, though, I just wanted to point out some things you might enjoy watching both at home and in theaters. Starting tomorrow on Wednesday, you can catch Ted Lasso Season 4 on Apple TV+. I thought it was over. I think the cast thought it was over, but they're back for another season. Also debuting tomorrow on Disney+, you can get all 8 episodes of the spin-off show Star Wars Visions Presents The Ninth Jedi, which is an anime continuation of a story that began as short segments on Star Wars Visions. And also on Wednesday, the new Ryan Murphy series, The Shards, premieres on FX, featuring what appear to be a group of 30-year-olds playing high schoolers based on the book by Bret Easton Ellis. On Thursday, you can catch Billie Eilish Hit Me Hard and Soft, the tour on Paramount+, although I don't think it's in 3D. And if you watch it that way, James Cameron might break your door down and throw your television out into the street. Then on Friday, there are some movies that are hitting theaters in the wake of Spider-Man and the Odyssey. One of them is One Night Only, which is getting a wide release. It stars Monica Barbaro and Callum Turner as some very attractive people who meet in a world where single people can only have sex one night per year. So a very relatable premise. Super Troopers 3 will also be hitting theaters this Friday in wide release. Broken Lizard returns with a 3rd Super Troopers film following 2001's original and 2018 sequel. Ice Cream Man will also be hitting theaters around the country this upcoming weekend. From director Eli Roth, I'm going to assume it's a very twisted horror movie with lots of blood, where ice cream from a truck turns kids into murderous psychopaths out to gruesomely murder all the adults. In limited release is one of my most anticipated movies of the year, Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma, the latest from Jane Schoenbrunn, who also made I Saw the TV Glow. Hannah Einbinder plays a director who's rebooting a horror franchise and seeks out the original star, who's played by Gillian Anderson. I hope it makes it to my area soon. Also in limited release this upcoming weekend is Tony, which is directed by Nirvana the band The Show's Matt Johnson. It stars Dominic Sessa as a young Anthony Bourdain, and it's being released through A24. And if you don't want to leave the house this weekend, you can watch a movie about a family that can't leave the house. It's called The Last House, and it stars Greta Lee and Wagner Moura, who are trapped inside their home with their family and may never be able to get out. So maybe that trip to the theater won't look so bad after you watch this film. And that's all I've got for you this week. Thank you so much for your patience, and I'm glad that we were able to wait until actuals so we could really examine this record-breaking performance for Spider-Man Brand New Day. If you are not subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell so you know when I upload a new video. But most of all, thank you for watching this video. Thank you to Factor for sponsoring. Be sure to check them out in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.